Now it's time for our perspective guest, and it is approaching a year now since the fall of the former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Since then, 16.5 million people in the country still depend on humanitarian aid in a country still marked by its poverty, its insecurity, also the sheer number of weapons still on the street. Since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, more than 1,200 people have been killed by mines or improvised explosive devices. The majority of such accidents on agricultural land, often in rural areas. Those figures come from the NGO Handicap International, and this week the organisation's Senior Advocacy and Policy Officer for its Syria programme, Noor Bimbashi, is here in Paris to speak about the problem. She joins me here on set. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us. We're going to talk about landmines in just a moment, but you were just telling me 10 days ago you were in Syria yourself. So just try and give us a bit of an impression about what life is like, if you like, for Syrians after the fall of Assad.
Yes, well, basically, I visited Syria and I spent 3 weeks there, and I just came back 10 days ago, and I can testify that the situation, the humanitarian situation, remains very fragile and very dire. And as you said, more than 16.5 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, meaning that 90% of the Syria population lives below the poverty line, which also means that 9 out of 10 Syrian families are in need of humanitarian assistance to meet the very basic needs that they want. The humanitarian situation also entails one of the biggest displacement and refugee crises in the world, despite the fact that thousands of Syrians are returning to their areas of origin, but they are returning to very fragile conditions, destroyed houses, contaminated lands, no water, no electricity, no access to healthcare or education. So this is in summary of what I've witnessed, but I have to say that I've seen one of the most hopeful people I met, and this is very inspiring.
That's exactly what I was going to ask next. I mean, did you get the impression that since the fall of Assad, people are more generally, I'm sure it depends on the individual, but generally hopeful for the future of their country?
Oh, yes, yes. On one hand, they are tired, they are exhausted and traumatized, but at the same time, every time they tell me about their struggles and the challenges, including the contamination, they say, well, brick by brick, we want to rebuild the country, we want to rebuild our houses. And this is why I met a lot of internally displaced people who just came back. So some families have returned only 10 or 2 weeks ago, and they tell me, we will be here. And it is true that our houses are destroyed, but our spirits are not.
Beautifully put. I know you're particularly highlighting the problem of landmines. Explain to us, first of all, what the problem is.
So I have to say that Syria is one of the most contaminated countries in the world. As you know, it has suffered from more than 13 years of active conflict, and so more than 16 million people are under direct threat of explosive ordnance and landmines. And I have to mention that there are certain areas that were on the front line, including also rural areas and agricultural lands and grazing areas, as you said. So these are the most sensitive and most challenging and contaminated lands where people are returning to. So I have to say that the situation directly impacts civilians, it kills and maims them, and at the same time it has an indirect impact which affects the ability of Handicap International and other humanitarian organizations to deliver effective aid to the affected population.
And I'm presuming there's an awful lot of work going on to try and locate all these mines, but it's just impossible to find them all.
Yes, absolutely, because you know these explosive devices and landmines are hidden and you cannot see them, and for civilians it's truly risky for them. So it takes, like Handicap International, we have extensive expertise in this field, and so we need to expedite the efforts because the country is fully contaminated and it's going to take quite some time.
And of course, the other thing you're trying to do is help people who have been hurt. We can show some images, in fact, that you took yourself while you were out there, showing, prosthetics, that kind of thing. But presumably it's very expensive and very difficult to do.
Yes, yes, yes. So the problem is following the funding cuts, and I've heard that from survivors of landmines and explosive ordnance, but at the same time from the hospital staff, including like this picture from Raqqa National Hospital. They echoed a lot of concerns that shortages of fund meant shortages of equipment, assistive devices like like wheelchairs and crutches, and also access to prosthetics, physical rehabilitation, mental health and psychosocial support. And all of these are not luxurious services. They are essential services for survivors and persons with disabilities that they deserve to have.
And how much of a difference does it make to people's lives to have access to these prosthetics?
It's really difficult, I can tell you. 65% of the population right now is suffering from lack of access to healthcare. So we can see that people are struggling not only to have these services, but sometimes to reach the hospital itself, because following the collapse of funding, a lot of hospitals had closed. So for example, in northeast Syria, more than 200 hospitals had to close. So there are immense burden on the current hospitals operating, and in terms of staff, in terms of advanced trainings and specialists, we have a shortage of that. So yeah, this is the situation.
Yeah. Tell us then about what you're trying to do about it. I mean, you're in Paris promoting the pyramide des chaussures, or I suppose it's the shoe pyramid. Yes. Tell us exactly what this is. We've got some images again we can show from the campaign of last year while you're talking about it.
So basically, before coming here, as I said, I was in Syria, and the main purpose, honestly, is to amplify the voices of survivors of landmines and explosive ordnance, and amplify the voices of persons with disabilities and affected population, because Syria deserves international action and attention. And as we know that Syria entered a new chapter, but at the same time the humanitarian crisis is getting worse. And so we need to continue supporting Syria and investing and providing sustainable funding.
So what exactly does that entail doing? We've seen some images here of people literally building pyramids of shoes.
Yes, they are building pyramids of shoes to raise awareness about the hidden dangers of landmines and explosive ordnance. It is really important to promote safer actions, especially for children, because children sometimes they are curious to touch hazardous objects. And we as Handicap International try as much as we can to promote safe behaviors and prevent injuries and death for children and for everyone else.
And what does it actually mean for those individual people that you're able to help? What difference does it make to their lives?
It brings them hope again, because survivors and persons with disabilities told me that not only they were suffering from the injury, but they were suffering from discrimination, social exclusion and stigma. And so it is important to give them the chance to rebuild their lives, have access to livelihoods, get jobs to provide for their families, go to school, and to have a normal life just like anyone else.
And amid all the problems that we see in the world at the moment, how difficult is it to get individual people, but also governments listening to you at this stage? Because, you know, inevitably Syria was very much in the news a year ago. Perhaps it's dropped down the news agenda. Now people are talking more about the situation in Ukraine, the situation in Gaza. How difficult is it to continue to inspire individual politicians, individual countries to try and help?
We will continue doing our best, and mainly my visit to Syria was one part of the job, to continue raising awareness about Syria and keeping it on the humanitarian agenda, because it's not less important. I understand there are other crises that are very pressing and very important, but Syria is also among them. And at the end of the day, as a humanitarian organization, we must do our job to serve the affected communities wherever and whenever.
Good to see the images. Good to hear about the latest situation as well. Thank you very much for coming in and talking to us on the programme today. Noor Bimbashi here in Paris, is Senior Advocacy and Policy Officer for the NGO Handicap. Thanks very much once again.